The first stone dropped, as my grandson, Leo, likes to say, the day I found a new cold lock on the door to our old storage cellar. That sound, that final metallic click, is the moment the soft, familiar life I knew with my husband, Alistair, twisted into a horror story. I was 72, living in a haze of early-stage, mild cognitive impairment, as the doctors called it. I knew my name was Alara, and I knew my husband, Alistair, and my son Jonathan, and my daughter-in-law Chloe. But the past few hours often felt like wet sea glass. Beautiful, but impossible to hold on to. Alistair had been gone for 10 days. His sister, my dearest sister-in-law, had a sudden collapse out in Arizona, and Alistair had to fly out immediately. He looked at me with such worry before he left our little farmhouse in the rolling hills of Kent County. "Are you absolutely certain, my love? Are you well enough?" he'd asked, holding my face in his trembling hands. "I'll be splendid, Alistair," I assured him, trying to sound much firmer than I felt. "Chloe is here. I have my routine, my pills, my knitting. Don't worry about a thing. Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She was an executive, a sharp-featured, efficient woman who worked in global finance. When Alistair's sister fell ill, Chloe had volunteered instantly to stay. Dad, don't worry about a thing," she told Alistair, her voice calm and authoritative. "I'll take care of Mom. You just focus on Aunt Viv." I was so relieved and grateful. She knew my routines, my medications, and how to handle the little flusters and confusions that came with my condition. It truly felt like a comfort. For the first few days, she was perfect. She made sure I took my medications, laid out exactly as prescribed in my weekly pill organizer. We sat in the living room, and she'd patiently watch my old black and white comedies with me. Jonathan, my son, called every evening from his business trip in Dublin, and Chloe would give him the daily report. "She's great, Dad. We're having fun. Don't worry about a thing." But by the middle of the second week, things started to change. Alistair's calls, the ones I lived for, those little reassurances from the other side of the continent, suddenly went straight to voicemail. My son's calls did too. When I asked, Chloe would text back, brief and efficient. "Sorry, busy with Mom. She's good. Call you later." But she never called back. I tried to call Alistair myself on the landline, but the phone was dead. "A power surge, Mom," Chloe explained, without looking up from her laptop, where she was always bent over some intricate, glowing spreadsheet. "It fried the phone line. Jonathan will fix it when he's back." Then she told me my neurologist had called. "Mom, the doctor thinks your pill organizer is too complicated. I'm just going to hold on to it and give you the right doses when you need them. It's simpler, especially since you're stressed." She took the pill organizer from the kitchen counter and placed it in her bag. It felt odd, a sudden loss of control, but she was so firm and professional. I told myself she was just helping. The quiet, comfortable routine of our home vanished. Chloe was no longer sitting with me. She was closed off in the dining room, on video calls with a man named Marcus who looked far too young and far too slick for global finance. He was always talking about digital commodities and unleveraged assets, and making gestures that felt loud and empty. I didn't like him. My own confusion began to deepen. I kept forgetting if I'd eaten. I would get up at night, convinced it was morning. One evening I started to cry, a quiet, helpless weep that had become more frequent. Chloe found me and her face hardened. "You need to rest, Mom." "This is too much stress," she said, her voice completely devoid of warmth. She steered me away from the bright living room toward the old storage cellar. It was a small room off the back pantry, used for storing seasonal decorations and canned goods. It was always dark and musty, but Alistair had made sure it had a light and a small, uncomfortable cot for when he worked late on his hobbies. "I think you should just stay in here until you feel calm," she said. I opened my mouth to protest, but she was already pushing me inside. The door slammed shut and I heard the dreadful sound. The key turning in the lock, then the click of a padlock, a heavy-duty one I'd never seen before. Panic, sharp and cold, cut through the fog in my mind. "Chloe, what are you doing?" "Let me out! I need my tea!" No answer, only silence. I pounded on the thick wooden door, rattling the handle. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was locked in. My own daughter-in-law, the wife of my son, had locked me in the dark. The hours that followed became a living nightmare. I had nothing but the thin blanket Alistair had left on the concrete floor. No clock, no phone. The dim bulb in the ceiling, The only source of light had been unscrewed. The darkness was absolute. I started to lose all sense of time. Was it night? Was it day? My stomach ached with hunger. I called out until my voice was hoarse and weak. I begged, I pleaded. No one answered. Eventually, the shame came. I was elderly, confused, and I desperately needed to use the toilet. But there was nowhere. I found an old bucket in the corner that Alistair had used for mixing paint. That became my toilet. The smell became overwhelming, a mixture of urine, sweat, and something sour. I was filthy, trembling, desperate. I knew I was going to die here. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was the horrifying clarity that kept washing over me. I had been left here deliberately. I don't know how many days passed. Maybe 4, maybe 6. I started to hallucinate, seeing shadows shift in the complete darkness. I had nothing to drink, and my lips cracked and bled. I would crawl to the door and try to claw my way out, leaving shallow scratches on the wood. Then, one evening, I think it was evening, I could hear the faint sound of traffic from the nearby road. I heard it. A faint thumping sound, rhythmic and desperate, coming from somewhere inside the house. It was me. I was still alive, still kicking. I started banging, harder this time, a frantic, primal rhythm. Then I heard a sound that made my dead heart leap. Alistair's voice. Alara. What is that? Where are you? I screamed back, my voice weak and rattling. Alistair, it's me. I'm here. Help me. I heard a shout, a frantic cry, and the sound of something heavy hitting the door. Alistair must have dropped his luggage and ran to the cellar door. The pounding grew louder, more frantic. I knew he was looking for something, anything to break the lock. I heard the frantic cry from the other side. Then, a series of 3 violent yanks, the sound of metal tearing wood, and the heavy thud of the padlock flying off. The door swung open. The smell hit him first. I could see his silhouette against the light from the pantry, and I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't hold me. I nearly collapsed at the bottom of the short, rickety stairs. Alistair was down those stairs in seconds, his face a mask of utter devastation and terror. I was filthy, trembling, my nightgown stained and torn. My face was gaunt. He looked at my eyes, which were trying desperately to focus, and for a terrifying moment, I didn't quite recognize him. Confusion and terror mixed in my expression. Alistair, I whispered, the name catching in my throat. Is that really you? He scooped me up in his arms. I weighed almost nothing. He held me tight, whispering apologies, whispering that I was safe. I felt the terrible shame again, the sense of being a burden, but mostly I felt the sheer, unbelievable relief of rescue. He carried me upstairs, his mind racing. Who did this? How did this happen? He laid me gently on the floral couch in the living room and immediately grabbed his phone, dialing the emergency number with trembling fingers. As he gave our address to the dispatcher, his eyes scanned the room. Everything was different. Furniture had been moved. There were boxes stacked in the corner he'd never seen before, and he realized my pill organizer was gone. The emergency medical technicians arrived within minutes. They checked my vitals, severely dehydrated, malnourished, and with early signs of exposure. Sir, when did you last see your wife? One of the paramedics asked Alistair. Alistair stood there, still in shock, and the answer broke his voice. 2 weeks ago, I left her with our daughter-in-law. Chloe was supposed to stay with her while I was in Arizona. The paramedic and her partner exchanged a significant glance. My husband watched that exchange, and I saw the last shreds of his denial shatter. Chloe did this? He rasped. They loaded me onto a stretcher. Alistair rode with me in the ambulance, holding my hand, whispering that it was over, that he was sorry for leaving me. We were taken to Kingston General Hospital. Once they admitted me and the doctors began their work, a kind nurse pulled Alistair aside. Mr. Holloway, I need to ask, she said gently. Has your wife been locked in that basement for the entire 2 weeks you were away? The question was a freight train. 14 days. My husband, looking at the reality of what his own daughter-in-law had done, could only whisper, I don't know. I just found her like that. An hour later, a police detective arrived. Detective Eva Ramirez, from the Ontario Provincial Police Elder Abuse Unit. Alistair sat in the hospital waiting room and told her everything. I'm Alistair Holloway, he began. I'm 65, retired from a career as a history professor. My wife, Ilara, is 72. She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. He explained that she was still lucid most of the time, could still manage routines, and knew their son, Jonathan. Our son? Jonathan is 42. He's a consultant at a major firm in Toronto, Alistair continued. He married Chloe 4 years ago. Chloe calls herself a financial planner, but I've never been entirely clear on what she actually does. She's always talking about disruptive capital and leveraged futures. I'll be honest, I never liked her. He described the phone calls, or lack thereof, during the second week. He described my confusion, his trip to Arizona, and how relieved he was when Chloe volunteered. He told the detective how I tried to call Alistair directly, but my phone went straight to voicemail, too. He had told himself everything was fine. He had stayed in Arizona with his brother. Detective Ramirez listened carefully, taking notes. Then she asked the question that made his blood run cold. Mr. Holloway, during those 2 weeks, did you give your daughter-in-law power of attorney over your wife's affairs? No, absolutely not. Did my wife sign any documents that you're aware of? Not that I know of. Why? The detective closed her notebook. We'll need to investigate further, but Mr. Holloway, this appears to be more than just neglect. We will be in touch. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. They rehydrated me, treated the physical damage, and ran a battery of tests. I kept asking where Chloe was. Where's Chloe? She was just here. She was helping me with my knitting. No, sweetheart, she wasn't, Alistair would say gently. On the second day, while I was sleeping, Alistair went home to look around more carefully. He needed to understand. What he found made him physically ill. The cellar door padlocked from the outside. The bucket, the thin blanket. No food, no water. The empty light socket. My husband, standing in the cold, musty air, realized his sweet, confused wife had been locked in darkness for 2 weeks. Upstairs, the proof was waiting. Chloe's laptop was still on the kitchen table, the password conveniently saved. Alistair told me later he felt like a thief, but he looked through her files. What he found was methodical, calculated, and evil. Scanned documents, power of attorney papers with my signature, bank statements, and a file labeled Strategic Investment, Marcus's Fund. Alistair sat there for an hour, reading through everything, his hands shaking so hard he could barely click the mouse. Here's what they'd done. The first week he was gone, Chloe had taken me to a sketchy notary in Scarborough, convincing me that the POA documents were just paperwork for Alistair's insurance. The notary hadn't asked questions. My signature was shaky, but recognizable. With that POA, Chloe had accessed our bank accounts. She had withdrawn $75,000 from our savings, money we'd painstakingly set aside for my future care. She'd also taken out a home equity line of credit against our house for another $100,000. We'd owned our home outright for decades. Now we were $100,000 in debt. All that money, $175,000, had been transferred to a numbered corporation called Maple Capital Management. Alistair found out quickly that Maple Capital was Marcus's company, a corporation registered just 6 months ago. Its business was high-yield digital commodity investment. In other words, Marcus was running some kind of crypto scheme, and they had used my confusion and Alistair's absence to fund it. But the part that made Alistair want to retch was the plan to keep me quiet. If he'd called the house, I would have known something was wrong. Even with my Alzheimer's, I'd know. So they locked me in the cellar. Alistair found a text exchange between Chloe and Marcus from day 4. Marcus. She keeps crying for Alistair. This isn't going to work. Chloe, she'll forget. Give it another day. The confusion helps, Marcus. What if someone checks on her? Chloe, who? Dad's in Arizona. Mom's friends haven't visited in months because of her condition. We're fine. They had planned this. They had knowingly locked a confused, vulnerable woman in a cellar to steal her life savings. Alistair called Detective Ramirez immediately. He showed the officers everything, the laptop, the forged documents, the text messages, and the state of the cellar. Mr. Holloway, the detective said carefully, this is elder abuse, financial exploitation, and unlawful confinement. Alistair looked at her, his voice heavy with the terrible knowledge. Where's my daughter-in-law now? He gave the police the address of their condo in the city's financial district. Officers were dispatched quickly. Chloe and Marcus weren't there. But what the officers found would lead to even more charges. The condo was nearly empty, but in the trash, they found paperwork for one-way tickets to Portugal and a printed email from a property manager in Lisbon about a 6-month rental. They were planning to run, take the money, and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty for financial crimes. But they had left too much evidence, and they had underestimated Alistair's love. Alistair had come home 3 days earlier than planned. If he had stayed in Arizona for the full 2 weeks, I might have died in that cellar. Chloe and Marcus would have played the devastated daughter-in-law and been on a plane before anyone asked questions. Detective Ramirez was blunt. Your early return saved your wife's life. That realization, that my son's wife, the woman I had welcomed into my family, had been willing to let me die for money, is a weight that still crushes Alistair. The manhunt began. Warrants were issued. Their faces were on the news within 48 hours. The media had a field day. I was released from the hospital on day 4. Still weak, but recovering physically. Mentally, though, I was more confused than before. I kept asking where Chloe was. Where's Chloe? She was just here. She was helping me with my knitting. No, sweetheart, she wasn't, Alistair would say gently. On day 6, Chloe and Marcus were arrested at the airport. They'd tried to board a flight to London, England, their first stop before connecting to Lisbon. Border services flagged them immediately. Detective Ramirez called Alistair within the hour. We've got them. They're in custody. Alistair told me he felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just emptiness. The charges came down like a hammer. 2 counts of elder abuse, 2 counts of financial exploitation, 2 counts of unlawful confinement, 2 counts of fraud, and 1 count of forgery. Marcus faced additional charges related to his investment fund, which turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. He'd taken money from at least 30 other investors, all elderly or vulnerable people, promising returns that never happened. He was just shuffling money around, classic fraud. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Camilla Chen, met with Alistair a week later. Mr. Holloway, she said, this is one of the most egregious elder abuse cases I've seen. The premeditation, the exploitation of your wife's condition, the financial devastation. This is serious. How long? Alistair asked. We're pushing for maximum sentences. 8 to 12 years for Chloe, 10 to 15 for Marcus because of the additional fraud charges. And the money? Camilla's expression softened. That's harder. Marcus's fund is bankrupt. The money is gone. We'll pursue restitution, but I want you to be realistic. The $175,000 was gone. Our savings, our home equity, vanished into a greedy digital scam. Alistair asked the question that haunted him. Did she know? Chloe, did she know what Marcus was doing was fraud? The prosecutor opened the evidence file. Yes, she knew. She had helped him recruit investors, including 2 of her co-workers. She had created fake financial statements for the fund. She was an active participant. My daughter-in-law was not a victim of her husband's scheme. She was a co-conspirator. The bail hearing was agonizing. Chloe's lawyer argued for release, but the Crown argued the opposite. Clear flight risk, destruction of evidence, and ongoing danger to me. The judge agreed. Bail denied. Chloe and Marcus would remain in custody until the trial. Alistair went to that hearing. He sat in the back row and watched his daughter-in-law, in an orange jumpsuit, plead with the judge. She cried. She apologized. She said she'd made a terrible mistake. When she saw Alistair, she tried to mouth something. Dad, please. He stood up and walked out. He couldn't look at her. The criminal case moved forward, but Alistair wasn't content to wait for justice from the courts alone. He hired a lawyer, Bernard Walsh, a partner at a firm that specializes in elder law and estate litigation. Bernard's advice was clear. Alistair, you have grounds for a civil suit. Sue them for everything they've taken, plus damages for what they put Alara through. Alistair filed suit 2 weeks after the bail hearing. The civil claims named Chloe Holloway and Marcus Reed as defendants, citing financial exploitation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conversion, and breach of fiduciary duty. He sought the return of the $175,000 in stolen funds, plus $200,000 in additional damages for the suffering they had inflicted upon me. My husband was determined to lock down any future assets they might acquire, any potential inheritance, any wages. If we couldn't get the money back now, we'd make sure they could never enjoy it later. But Alistair had more necessary tasks to handle. He contacted the College of Financial Planners of Ontario. Chloe had used her credentials as an executive financial planner to lend legitimacy to Marcus's scheme. Her own co-workers from the firm had trusted her professional judgment and lost money. She had violated every ethical standard of her profession. Alistair filed a formal complaint. Within a month, Chloe's professional license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal trial. If she was convicted, she would be permanently disbarred. She would never work in finance again. Did that feel satisfying to me? No, it didn't. It just felt tragically, coldly necessary. The months that followed were a blur. My doctor told Alistair that stress accelerates cognitive decline. The trauma of those 2 weeks in the cellar sped up the progress of my Alzheimer's. I stopped asking about Chloe, which was a terrible silence. It was like my brain had created a protective void. An empty space where my son's wife used to be. Alistair hired a full-time caregiver, a kind woman named Ingrid, to help me while he dealt with the legal proceedings. The bills were piling up: medical expenses, lawyers' fees, and those awful mortgage payments on the home equity line of credit we never wanted. We were drowning financially, and the people responsible were sitting in jail awaiting trial. The preliminary hearing happened in January, 5 months after Alistair's frantic return. My husband testified. He walked the court through finding me, discovering the documents, and realizing the full scope of their calculated evil. Chloe's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, too manipulated by Marcus, desperate for money, suffering from her own mental health issues. It was garbage, and the judge saw right through it. "Miss Holloway," the judge stated, his voice ringing with authority, "you are a trained financial executive. You understood exactly what you were doing. You exploited your mother-in-law's cognitive vulnerability for financial gain. There is no mitigating factor that excuses that." The case was bound over for trial. The trial date was set for June, 8 months after the nightmare began. But before the trial, something unexpected happened. Marcus's lawyer approached the prosecutor, Camilla Chen, with a deal. Marcus would plead guilty to all charges and cooperate fully in testifying against Chloe in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would claim that Chloe had been the mastermind, that she had planned the whole thing, and that he had just gone along with it. It was the ultimate coward's move, throwing his wife under the bus to save his own skin. Camilla Chen called Alistair to discuss the offer. "If Marcus testifies, we have an airtight case against Chloe," she explained. "His testimony, combined with the forensic evidence, guarantees a conviction and a strong sentence." "What do you think? Will he serve time?" Alistair asked, his voice flat. "Yes, we're offering 8 years with eligibility for parole after serving 2/3. He'll realistically be in prison for at least 5 years. And Chloe? Without the deal, she faces a jury and there's always risk," Camilla admitted. "But with Marcus's testimony, we'd push for the maximum 12 years. Alistair told me he thought about me, still sometimes asking why Chloe didn't call. He thought about those 14 days in the dark cellar. He thought about our life savings, our home equity, our trust, all gone. "Take the deal," Alistair said. Marcus pleaded guilty in February. His sentencing hearing was brief. He offered a written statement of remorse. I'm sure his lawyer wrote every word. The judge was unimpressed. "Mr. Reed, you participated in a scheme that targeted vulnerable elderly individuals, including your own mother-in-law. You prioritized profit over human dignity. 8 years in federal prison." Chloe's trial began in June. It lasted 3 weeks. The Crown presented the evidence: the forged POA, the bank transfers, the state of the cellar, the texts planning the Lisbon escape. They called me to testify. That was the hardest day of Alistair's life, he told me. Watching my confused, diminished self try to explain what had happened to me. I kept getting mixed up, forgetting details, asking the judge if I could go home now. Chloe's lawyer tried to use that confusion to suggest I couldn't be a reliable witness. But then, the Crown played the video. The police had taken footage of the cellar the day they executed the search warrant. That cold, dark space.
The bucket.
The thin blanket, the scratches on the door, where I had tried to claw my way out. The jury watched in silence. 2 of them were crying. Marcus testified next. He laid out the entire scheme, how Chloe had approached him with the idea, how she'd researched the POA laws, found the notary who wouldn't ask questions, and planned the timeline around Alistair's trip to Arizona. It was all her, he claimed. I just did what she told me to do. Even if that was self-serving, the evidence backed it up. Chloe's laptop showed she'd been researching power of attorney, elder exploitation, and countries without extradition weeks before Alistair's sister had her collapse. She had planned this. Chloe took the stand in her own defense. It was a disaster. She tried to claim she'd been trying to help us, that Marcus had manipulated her, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. The prosecutor, Camilla Chen, destroyed her on cross-examination. Miss Holloway, you texted your co-conspirator. She'll forget. Give it another day. The confusion helps. You were referring to your mother-in-law. What were you hoping she'd forget? Silence. Chloe's face crumpled. Miss Holloway, Camilla pressed, her voice clear and unforgiving. You locked your mother-in-law in a cellar without adequate food or water for 14 days. You stole her life savings. You planned to flee the country. And you want this court to believe you never meant to hurt anyone? Chloe broke down sobbing. The jury was unmoved. Deliberations took 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The sentencing was 2 months later. Alistair submitted a victim impact statement, 5 pages detailing what this had done to me, to him, to our lives. How we'd lost not just our money, but our sense of safety, our trust, our family. I tried to write one too, but my mind wouldn't let me. My neurologist submitted a letter instead, documenting how the trauma had accelerated my cognitive decline. The judge read everything. Then she looked directly at Chloe. Miss Holloway, you are an educated, intelligent woman. You understood the vulnerability of your mother-in-law's condition, and you exploited it without conscience. You betrayed not just her trust, but every standard of human decency. This court sees no mitigating factors. Chloe Holloway, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Alistair tells me he exhaled for what felt like the first time in a year. It was over, but it wasn't. Not really. The civil suit settled a month after the criminal sentencing. Chloe and Marcus were jointly liable for $375,000. Of course, they don't have that money. The court placed liens on any future assets, wages, or inheritance they might acquire. Alistair's lawyer, Bernard, was very clear. If they ever have anything, we'll get it, but realistically, we'll never see that money. The restitution order from the criminal case says they owe us the original $175,000 plus interest. But again, good luck collecting that from a federal prison. As for our home, the Kent County farmhouse, the home where Jonathan grew up and where Alistair and I plan to grow old, we managed to refinance the home equity line of credit, HELOC, back into our main mortgage. But now, for the first time in 30 years, we have monthly mortgage payments. We'll be paying this debt off for the rest of our lives. My care costs are climbing as my Alzheimer's progresses. Ingrid, our full-time caregiver, is wonderful, but she's expensive. Insurance covers some of it, but not all. Alistair is now quietly looking at possibly selling the house within a few years to afford a specialized memory care facility when the time comes. My heart aches when I think about leaving the Rose Garden. Chloe is serving her sentence at Grand Valley Institution for Women, about an hour west of Toronto. She'll be eligible for parole in 8 years. Marcus is at Joyceville, a medium-security prison near Kingston. His parole eligibility is in 5 years. Alistair hasn't visited either of them. He won't visit. As far as he's concerned, he doesn't have a daughter-in-law anymore. People ask him sometimes if he regrets pursuing the charges so aggressively. They ask if he wishes he'd tried to work it out as a family, or if he thinks 12 years is too harsh. Here is what he tells them. And it is the only truth that matters. Chloe locked her confused, terrified mother-in-law in a dark cellar for 14 days. She stole everything we had saved to care for me in my final years. She planned to let me die and flee the country with the money. She did all of this knowingly, calculatedly, without conscience. 12 years isn't too harsh. It's mercy. I don't understand where Chloe is. Sometimes I still ask Alistair. I look up from my knitting and say, "Is Chloe away for work?" That girl is always traveling. He tells me that Chloe is away for work. It's easier than explaining the truth to someone who won't remember the explanation anyway. He protects me with small, necessary lies. Last month it happened for the first time. I forgot who Alistair was. We were sitting by the fireplace, and I looked at him, really looked at him, and asked who he was and what he was doing in my house. My voice was polite, but utterly distant. It only lasted an hour before he managed to pull me back. He sat close, played our wedding song, and showed me a photograph of us in our 20s. The recognition sparked, and I cried, clinging to him. "It's begun," I whispered. "The final stage, I think about that sometimes. How Chloe stole not just our money, but our time. The time Alistair and I had left before the Alzheimer's takes me completely. We should have spent those 2 weeks together, cherishing the days we still had. Instead, I spent them in hell. That is what I can't forgive. The money can be replaced eventually. The house can be sold. But those 14 days, and all the days after that were stolen by the stress, the trauma, and the fear, those are gone forever. So no, Alistair doesn't regret the 12 years. He would do it again. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. It's about saying loudly and clearly that some things are unforgivable. My daughter-in-law learned that the hard way. I hope everyone listening to this story learns it the easy way. Your family's trust is sacred. Break it, and don't be surprised when the consequences break you in return. As for Alistair and me, we're still here, still fighting, still together. That's more than Chloe wanted for us, and it's more than she'll have for the next 12 years. And honestly, that's the only justice that truly matters.